Hi everyone, welcome to Deep Geek Live. This is the latest in a series of live videos looking at the great houses of Westeros. A little bit of the history, a little bit of where they are now, and a little bit of thinking about the future. Today we are looking at House Tyrell. And as always, we'll start with a little bit of thinking about what's the background to this house? What's their backstory? So House Tyrell is not one of the ancient houses of Westeros, not the way that we think of the Starks or maybe the Lannisters or someone like that. They are, well, they would probably claim they are because they claim descendants from Garth the Gardener, the Age of Heroes character down in the Reach in the south. So they probably think of themselves as being ancient, but for most people, they are relatively new on the scene in terms of power in Westeros. In the Reach, the fertile, the richest part of all of Westeros, the greatest house for many, many years, many centuries was House Gardener. They were the lords of the Reach. They were the people who were in charge of all of that area of the southwest, which, and I call it the richest, it's the most lush, the most verdant part of all of the Seven Kingdoms. This is the area that has the greatest agrarian economy going on. That they can feed all of their people year in, year out in a way that the North could only dream of. So the Southwest, the Reach, is hugely powerful, and the kings of the Reach were House Gardener. They were the kings of the Reach for millennia, all the way back to the Age of Heroes. Now, where House Tyrell comes in is that they were always one of the sort of the second in charge houses. And then over time, they saved the gardeners a couple of times. They were the ones who were always looking out for them, always there, being the right-hand man all the way through. And they were made stewards. If you're thinking in terms of Lord of the Rings, then you can imagine the way that in Gondor, stewards were the people who would look after the kingdom while the king is off doing other things. And that's the idea with the Tyrells. They were made the kind of the prime minister, the people in charge, the technocrats, while the king was off doing whatever the king is doing. So that was what was happening there. Then over time, they got turned into a permanent position, a hereditary position, that the Tyrells were always going to be the stewards. They were the high stewards of the Reach. That was what was going on. So they were important, the second most important house in the Reach. Now, there's also House Hightower. We shouldn't forget about them. They were always rich. They were always influential. They were the lords of the biggest city for millennia, Old Town and all the rest of it. But in terms of the whole area, the second most politically important house were the Tyrells. Then we get the Targaryen invasion. And when the Targaryen invasion happened, the Gardeners were one of those families that opposed the Targaryens. Looking back, doesn't seem like a good idea. But we get the Field of Fire. We had a kind of an echo of that, a future echo of that in the show, when you get Daenerys just like burning her way through so many different soldiers. But in the books, in the history, that did happen at the Field of Fire, and House Gardener, who were the Lords of the Reach, basically killed. They had left in charge in the Reach House Tyrell, and so when the Targaryens got to Highgarden, House Tyrell went, okay, let's open the doors, you can be ours. And as a reward for that, the Targaryens said to House Tyrell, you are now the Lords of the Reach. So that is how they achieved their position of power. Some houses, like House Stark, have been in power, in charge of the North for millennia. House Tyrell, just a relatively short 300 years or so. So that's what's going on here, is we get House Tyrell, who have always been the stewards, the second in command, the technocrats, the people who are running it. They are the ones who are suddenly in charge. So they don't have all of the history, this hereditary that is leading up to it, but that is where they're at. So when we get up to the present day, the Tyrells are the lords of the most rich region in all of Westeros, but they might not be the most powerful lords in that region. The High Towers are lords of Old Town and are hugely rich, hugely powerful. The Tarleys are also there with many, many years experience of fighting in the marches against the Dornish, and they've got in Randall Tarley, they've got an experienced war leader. So the Tyrells are there. Yes, they're in charge, but they're not necessarily the most powerful house. Highgarden as a castle is a beautiful place. This is the center of chivalry in all of Westeros. This is where the great tourneys happen and all the rest of it, but probably it's not a very easily defended castle. We have to look at this as being quite a showy place. People go there to enjoy life. The growing strong, the rose is not a symbol of strength, it's a symbol of joy, happiness, and all the rest of it. So House Tyrell are not there as this gritty old house. They are there as the people who've taken over and are ruling by consent in a good and happy place. And that is where they're at in the story. And the characters we have coming out from that probably reflect that. We get Mace Tyrell, who is technically he's the Lord, but he comes across as a bit of a buffoon. He doesn't have to be strong because he's got this incredibly rich and wonderful, powerful area that he's in charge of. And then we get people like Loras Tyrell, who is very showy. He is a knight. He is the epitome of the knightly virtue. And then we get people like Marjorie, who are there all about the game. She's beauty, but she's also cleverness. And we get obviously Elena Tyrell, who is the matriarch of this family, who is all about playing the game. So we have a family who are well versed in the idea of the Game of Thrones, though perhaps not so much in fighting. And we'll get on to what their history is in fighting and Robert's Rally and all the rest of it as we go through this live stream. But let's start with this idea, this clear idea. House Tyrell are powerful, they are rich, but perhaps they're not as ancient, perhaps they're not as magical, perhaps they're not as strong as some of the other houses we know. So let's just have a quick flick through. Morgan R. Hayes, thank you so much for the super sticker. I really appreciate that. And also via Lemon Cake, thank you so much. Very generous, saying just to say thank you for all the efforts you put into the content. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. That's very kind. I think I'm pretty much caught up now on the super chats. We did have one, if I could just put it up before we went on air, from Ryan Larkin. Thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. And also Sabrina Wenzel saying, how do you keep track of the enormous list of characters and backstories? A couple of super chats. Thank you, Sabrina. Saying, how do you keep track? Do you have a massive collection of family trees and will you publish it? I don't, but George R. R. Martin has done a lot of this work for us. It's just a matter of, I've been doing this for 2-3 years now, and once you start to immerse yourself in it, then you start to let it all sink in. So no, I don't. I know there are some people who have done some amazing family trees. So Gemma Secrets of the Citadel did keep an amazing family tree if you ever get a chance to see that, which was fantastic. But at the back of all of the Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire books, you will find there's a whole list of characters and how they link into the plot as a whole. So do check that out. I'm not one of those people who makes my own family trees, linking everybody together. There are always cleverer people who care a lot more about the details than me in the chat. So I'm just like a high level person. I love getting the high level picture of all of this and getting into the characters. So I'm not going to publish any family tree videos at any point in the future. Although I did do one on the Targaryen family tree, it has to be said, a little while ago, if you're interested in that, which is how Bloodraven was manipulating it. Okay, let's go to Dawn saying no glasses yet. The glasses are now on. If you're interested in when the glasses come on and go off, it's basically just when I'm looking at the chat. Or I'm reading questions from my patrons. Let's go to a question from Mara Lee. Mara, thank you so much. I hugely appreciate your support for the channel. Mara saying, who were the 3 Sage Kings of whom King Gwaine Gardner was the last? Well, so this is going back before the Tyrells. When you get the people who are ruling the Reach all the way through those years, the Targaryen invasion was just the last of many invasions that went through. And the Reach as a whole has a history of accommodating, bending, accepting new arrivals and not taking a pragmatic political position on this, not just saying, no, you can't come in, I'm not going to deal with you. The Hightowers are the exemplars of this. I've talked about House Hightower a few times. In fact, I did a live stream about House Hightower quite recently, if you want to check that out. But all of the Reach as a whole has got this slightly pragmatic perspective. They will accept newcomers, they will change their own ways, they will adapt themselves to what is going on. Now, the 3 Sage Kings were kings of the Gardeners, not the Tyrells. So this was with the Andal invasion. Now, the Andal invasion was huge, but it was also slow. And it happened over many, many years. The Andals were in Essos and they moved across as a race. They moved across into Westeros, where they needed to fight, they fought. Where they didn't, they intermarried. And it's not so much an invasion as a sort of a slow-moving incursion, a changing of the sort of the makeup of the people of Westeros. Now, the Reach, obviously being in the southwest, it took a little while for them to come across, and they had a time to start to think about, how do we react to this? How do we adapt to this invasion of this foreign folk? And the decision was basically, well, okay, we'll just adapt to it. We'll add them into our culture. We'll accept the exciting things that are happening here. We'll keep the things that we love, but we'll just grow and change and move forward. So the 3 Sage Kings, and as always with these things, the names that are given to people, it's what history has decided. They're Sage Kings because they were kings who made the right decisions. History has said. History in this case probably meaning the Maesters. So the 3 of them were, first of all, we've got Garth the Ninth. Now, he was the first king of the Reach to go, okay, maybe we'll accept these new people in. Let's build a sept or 2. Let's allow them to be here. We're not going to fight them. This was a big decision. We're not going to fight them. We're going to allow them to come and settle and intermarry and all the rest of it. They will be a part of who we are. that was an important decision. The second Sage King was a guy called Merle the First. Now, he took the next step. He went and converted to the Faith of the Seven, because the Andals brought the Faith of the Seven with them. This wasn't a thing that was in Westeros before that. He converted to the Faith of the Seven. He then started pushing this idea that the faith could not just be down in the southwest, but could be the religion across the piece. And he pushed this idea that perhaps other places could have septs and so on. The third of the three Sage Kings was this guy called Gwaine the Fifth. Now he again, he took the next step, and he was actually born into the faith. So he was the first king of the Reach who was born a member of the Faith of the Seven, and then he basically lived it. He went on, he was made a knight, and the knights, again, we should probably say this is a Faith of the Seven thing. Knights were not an old gods thing. The North did not have knights. The North still do not have knights, apart from a few areas in the south in White Harbor and so on. So the three Sage Kings were the kings who basically decided that, yeah, okay, our bit of Westeros, we're just going to accept these new people, and we're going to understand them, and we're going to allow their culture to become a part of our culture. Vampris99, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, I imagine Highgarden as more of a palace than a castle. The Tyrells are the arbiters of high culture and arbor gold, and not martial prowess. Yes, absolutely. So I'm a bit of a castle nerd myself, and when I had Professor Castle on here, we were talking briefly about Highgarden. Highgarden is not a hugely defendable castle. When you think about the defendable castles of Westeros, you think of things like the Eyrie, or maybe even Casterly Rock, the kinds of things that are hard to attack. Storm's End as well, the kind of things that you look at them and go, I don't know how to take that. Highgarden isn't that. It is, yes, it's technically a castle, but it's not built in a hugely defendable position. It's built for pleasure. It's built as a palace for the king, as you say. So that is what is going on with Highgarden. It's if I were to pick one place to live, to enjoy a happy life in all of Westeros, there aren't many places in Westeros you'd pick to live a happy life. Highgarden probably is it. Arbiters of high culture and arbor gold, yes, this is where they have all of the tourneys. Lots of tourneys happen down there. This is where the spirit of knighthood comes from, and that people, we read of people just taking boats up and down the river, just exploring the fun things that are there. There are islands that have got statues and minstrels playing. It sounds like a fantastic place. They've got a little maze with roses and all the rest of it. It's wonderful. It's not a grim, gritty castle that is defendable. So, yeah, absolutely, Vampirist99, I agree. This is not a castle to be defended. Yes, it may well at some point have to be defended. But no, it's not. That's not the main aim. Joshua Clark, oh wow, thank you very much. That's a very generous super chat, saying, didn't realize the Well Told Tale was separate Patreon from Deep Geek. Got signed up and paying back dues. Love the content. Well, thank you, Joshua. That's incredibly generous super chat. Yeah, for those who don't know, I've got two channels. I've got the Well Told Tale as well as Deep Geek. So Deep Geek, you get all of the Deep Geek content. You get at a $5 level, then you get all of the audio I produce for Deep Geek. $10 level, you get that plus a credit down below every video, and also a chance every now and then to vote on what you want me to be covering. Over on the Well Told Tale, it's just kind of a similar breakdown, but I produce extra content for people if you're interested in extra audio narration. That's my audio narration channel. I basically I love science fiction and fantasy. I'm a bit of an addict. I devour the classics of science fiction and fantasy as stories. They have so much to offer us. So what I do on the Well Told Tale is I just open up what I consider to be the finest science fiction and fantasy stories ever written, and I just narrate them. Frankenstein, The War of the Worlds, Call of Cthulhu, Wizard of Oz, everything that is science fiction or fantasy based. If it's a classic story, I will be covering it over on that channel. So yes, I have got 2 Patreons because they're offering different things for different channels. The Well Told Tale one, I've got another. I'm going to do an extra bit of bonus, just incidentally. Bonus stuff for the Well Told Tale coming up very shortly in about a week or so. Every 3 months, then I try and produce some additional bonus material for my patrons over on the Well Told Tale. Next time coming up, as I say, in the next week or two, I think I'm going to do a classic fairy tale. This is ancient fantasy. Rapunzel. What is the original Rapunzel story? I'm going to be narrating that over on the Well Told Tale. I've previously done things by Edgar Allan Poe and others there, if you're interested. So thank you so much for that, Joshua. That's very kind. Yes, there are 2 different Patreons if you're after different benefits on that. Morgan R. Hayes for Absolute Zeroist. Are they lying about Loras being injured at Dragonstone? Thank you. First of all, thank you so much. I love it when people do super chats on behalf of other people. It's quite lots of questions going on in the chat. I often miss them just going through. So thank you so much when you pick up on somebody else. I've got some questions coming up on that in a little bit, so I'm going to pick up on that question very soon, if that's okay. But the short answer is, I don't think they're lying, but I think Loras probably was injured. I'll give the whole background when we get to that. It's probably going to be in about half an hour or so, but yeah, they're not. I don't think that there's a motivation for people to be lying about that, is the short answer. Orion Johnson, thank you so much, saying, if they were to make an animated A Song of Ice and Fire in which they cast YouTubers, oh no, this is one of those questions, in which they cast YouTubers such as yourself, Preston Jacobs, Alt Shift X, etc., as minor characters, which character would you want to play? If I'm only allowed a minor character in A Song of Ice and Fire, hang on, I need a drink of water to decide this one. Just for fun and because he's going to come up later, I'm going to go for Sedontus. He's a very amusing character. But if I were to have to narrate a character, perhaps Nimble Dick Crab, just because he's great fun to read. Thank you. That's exactly the kind of question that I'm not a fan of, because I have to properly think about it. Thank you so much. Adam Baum saying you'd want to play Arya. Yes, I don't think she counts as a minor character. Brandon Gaines asking about Gemma from Secrets of the Citadel. Yes, I have heard from her recently. She's doing well, but yeah, she's taking a break from doing Secrets of the Citadel. I know that she hugely appreciates all the people who do ask after her. Secrets of the Citadel was a fantastic channel. Anime lover Nicole over on Patreon says, and I should, as I don't think I said already, my live streams, I try to frame around questions from my patrons. This is one of the benefits from being a patron, is a chance to ask questions in advance. I always say, give like 24 hours notice to my patrons. This is what the next live stream is going to be about. And all of my patrons at any level get a chance to say what questions they want me to be asking, and I try my very best to answer all of them. Anime Level Nicole, who is a long-term patron, hi there, saying, do you think it was House Tyrell that convinced the Gardener Kings to go to war, and how did they grab power as the Lords Paramount when there are other houses with more claim? So this is building on what I was talking about a moment ago. So when you say there are other houses with more claim, I think the only house that was more powerful, as it were the Hightowers. Now, the Hightowers were richer. Undoubtedly, they were richer. They had a bigger army. They had a bigger navy. They were the most important house down in the Reach. And as you go through Fire and Blood, I think I said it a couple of times recently, but there are 3 houses that it doesn't come across on the show, but there are 3 houses in that first half of the Targaryen rule that were over and above everyone else. And those were House Baratheon, House Velaryon, and House Hightower. Those were the 3 most powerful houses in all of Westeros underneath the Targaryens. So House Hightower was clearly the most powerful house in the Reach. But did they want to be Lords Paramount of the Reach? It's debatable. I don't think they needed to be honest. They already had the power. At the time, they were the lords of the largest city in all of Westeros. They were the patrons of the Faith of the Seven. The Starry Sept was there. This was before the Great Sept was built in King's Landing. The center of the Faith of the Seven Kingdoms was down in Old Town. The Maesters were based in Old Town. Did they even need to be in charge of the Reach technically? Well, no. They were already the most powerful family. They didn't need the title, so it didn't matter to them hugely. But frankly, it really was down to the Targaryens. Who did they want in charge? And the Targaryens decided they wanted, and this was probably Aegon who did this, they wanted the Tyrells in charge. And it's probably a canny political move from them, because the Hightowers were very powerful. Why would you give them more power if you could spread it out a little bit? This is a new king. The source of the Targaryen power was just the dragons, and they were going to lose one of those dragons very soon. So why would they allow rivals to get even more power? It was in their best interest to spread it around. So it wasn't so much about the Tyrells grabbing power as the Targaryens deciding where that power should go. Okay, question from Mara Lee saying, the sigil for House Tyrell reminds me of the Tudor rose. Does this house have a Valyrian steel sword? So, yes, the rose, and as we should always remind ourselves, that the inspiration for the first part, this Game of Thrones, was the War of the Roses. So yes, we get this rose being the symbol of House Tyrell. Is that coincidence? I suspect not. I'm sure this is George R.R. Martin who is kind of playing with this idea. But do they have a Valyrian steel sword? We don't hear of one, is the short answer. And we probably would have heard of one. So this probably tells us a lot about their place in the world before the Targaryen invasion. So the houses that got Valyrian steel swords were the ones who were powerful or rich 400 or more years ago, probably 400 to 600 years seems to be the time when most of the Westerosi houses were gaining them. House Tyrell at the time, yes, they were high stewards of the Reach, but they were not the most powerful and rich house in the Reach. House Gardener were. The second most powerful house in the Reach were House Hightower. So they probably would at some point have gained one, but then there was the doom of Valyria, and then the chance for them to get one passed by. So no, they do not have, as far as we can tell. I mean, maybe George R. R. Martin simply hasn't mentioned it, but it seems unlikely. As far as we can tell, they do not have a Valyrian steel sword, because 400 to 600 years ago, they were not one of the most powerful or rich families in all of Westeros. Lawn Duck 20 saying, "Hello, Robert. I've always been curious on why Loras gave Sansa the red rose at the hand's tourney. In a later chapter, we learned that he doesn't even remember giving it to her. Did Renly tell him to do it, or did Loras just decide to give it to the first highborn beauty he saw in the crowd?" Okay, so this is a question all the way back from book 1. We have the tourney of the hand. Ned is still alive. He has this new hand of the king. Robert Baratheon, who loves a good tourney, he sets it up. Ned is aghast. He doesn't want all the expense, but Robert Baratheon has a tourney nonetheless. It was there on the show. We remember it. There was the big showdown between the Hound and the Mountain and all the rest of it. Loras Tyrell is there, and he does well. He wins his first 3 jousts, and in each of those 3, then there's this kind of like somebody's holding all of these roses, and it's all about, you know, how the chivalry and all the rest of it. And he grabs a white rose each time, and he gives it to apparently a random woman each time. They're all, oh, and he's all, oh, I'm king. I mean, you know the thing. Loras is all about style over substance at this point, as far as this is concerned. He's not giving a rose to any of those women because he thinks that they're amazing. He's gay. He's just giving the rose to a random woman because that is what knights do. Then the 4th rose he gives, he picks out a red rose, he gives it to Sansa. And we see this from Sansa's perspective. And she receives it, and this clearly means a huge amount to her. Then later, Loras says, "Did I give you a rose? I can't remember." So what's going on? Now, there's a lot going on here, but it's mostly about George R. R. Martin being the master of perspective. Sansa, when she first arrives down in King's Landing, she's obsessed with all the chivalry, with the knights, with the tourneys and all the rest of it. They don't have any of that up at Winterfell. They didn't do that stuff. So she loves it. She's lapping up this idea of all these knights jousting and then the giving out of the roses and all the rest of it. And so when she gets, and she has a huge crush on Loras, it's very clear. When she gets given this red rose and he gives her this, you know, this line, or "There is no more beautiful woman than you," or something like that. He knows all the words that you have to say as a knight. And she takes it from him, and this means huge amounts to her. She thinks she's special. She's got the red rose and all the rest of it. But then later we discover that he can't even remember that. It's not a thing to him. This is George R. R. Martin showing us the difference between people's perspectives. It meant a huge amount to Sansa at the time because she had these huge expectations of what it was to be a lady at court and all the rest of it. To Loras, he won tournament jousts all the time. He gave out roses to women all the time. It wasn't a thing to him. In terms of the politics, he was giving out roses to people, but this was the Hand's tourney. This was the Lord of Winterfell's tourney. He probably should have, and he probably knew that he should give a rose to the eldest daughter of Ned Stark. That was a thing he probably should do. He didn't think about it. It didn't mean huge amounts to him. It was just a thing he had to do. So he gave the rose to Sansa. So that was what was going on. It's one of these things that we could interpret on many extra layers, but I think it's just George R. R. Martin showing us the difference in perspective and what different things meant to different characters. Eric Fogg saying, why did Elena involve Littlefinger in the convoluted Purple Wedding assassination? I don't see what he brought to the table for this plot that the wealth of the house couldn't have accomplished. The actual use of the strangler seems to have put Marjorie unnecessarily at risk, since she was drinking from the same chalice. Also, Baelish is a dangerous person to needlessly be in league with for treason. Okay, so this is the Purple Wedding. This is the assassination of Joffrey, and we discover that this was a sort of a joint plot between Littlefinger and Elena Tyrell. Now, Elena Tyrell did not want Marjorie marrying Joffrey for obvious reasons, and so she wanted him assassinated. Peter Baelish wanted Sansa to be indebted to him and to leave King's Landing with him. They had a shared interest in killing Joffrey and making Sansa feel that she might be framed for it. So that was what was going on there. Now, the overall plot was that Sansa had this hairnet on the show. I think it was a necklace that Littlefinger provided, and one of the sort of beads of it had the strangler poison in it. Elena Tyrell came up and adjusted the hairnet, and then she put the strangler poison into Joffrey's glass, and he drank from it and he died. That was what was going on. Now, the complication came that the two of them, Joffrey and Marjorie, shared a glass or a chalice. That seems to be something that Mace Tyrell did, slightly bumbling. He clearly wasn't a part of this. It was an assassination attempt based on the idea that this was only going to be Joffrey drinking from that chalice. Why do you include Littlefinger in this? Well, I think from Elena's perspective, this is about deniability. She is there. Yes, she was actually the person who poisoned Joffrey. Forgetting everything else, she was the person who did it. She was. If Hercule Poirot were here, he would be pointing his finger at her. She did it. But others were involved. And Elena Tyrell is obviously clever, and she obviously wants to make sure that the finger of blame is pointed at various other people. It was always going to be pointed at Tyrion. She knew that. Sansa, she probably liked Sansa, but she was very happy for Sansa to also be blamed. If she knew, as she almost certainly did, that Sansa was going to be wearing the hairnet and then disappearing immediately after Joffrey died, then that immediately looks like it's her fault. Why on earth would anyone blame Elena Tyrell? So from her perspective, this was all about making sure that somebody else was the prime suspect, not her. Because other than the things that were going on there, if Joffrey died on his wedding day to Marjorie Tyrell, you would go, well, who doesn't want Joffrey to be marrying Marjorie? Elena. So why she would include Littlefinger in this was in order to make sure that there were other people who were looking a whole lot more guilty than her. Sansa running away was one of them, and she did run away. She ran away straight away afterwards. So she looked guilty. Tyrion looked guilty. Elena did not look guilty. A few people saying the poison was in the pie. Yeah, I've seen those kind of. There are other conspiracy theories that perhaps the poison was in the pie rather than the chalice, but I think that all the hints are that this was Elena and Littlefinger, and it was the hairnet. We have the vision from the ghost of High Heart about the woman with the hairnet and the poison dripping from it. So that is, and the ghost of High Heart, the Woods Witch, her visions we can trust, I think. So yes, absolutely. Eric, I just did that one, I think. Okay, let's go to questions more about the present day for House Tyrell rather than sort of the history. Henning J saying, how do the other noble houses of the Reach view the role of House Tyrell, especially as the story concludes? For example, it seems that Randall Tarley does not respect them much, although the Tyrells are their overlords. Even Elena makes fun of House Tyrell and their house words, and still seems to feel more like a Redwyne. Could it be that another noble house rules the Reach in the end, and would replace House Tyrell as Wardens of the South? Yes, so this builds on what I've been saying already, is that the Tyrells aren't like the Starks or even the Lannisters or the Arryns even. They are not an ancient house that has always ruled the area and everyone has to respect that they've always ruled the area. They just happen to be in the right place at the right time. They happen to be the people who were there, and the Targaryens honored them by making them the rulers. It's not that they were the most militarily powerful. It's not that they were the richest. It's not that they were the most ancient or anything like that. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time. So, yeah, of course, there are other families who do probably look to them and think, well, maybe it could have been us. That's true for House Stark. You get the Boltons who think, yeah, we can take them, as we saw in the story so far. So obviously there are always families who are trying to usurp them. The Hightowers, I think, are very happy just where they are doing their thing. I don't think that they feel they need to be the lords. The Tarleys are slightly different. I think the Tarleys probably feel they are an ancient house. They are a martial house, and I think that Randall Tarley thinks that he is way more competent than anyone in the Tyrells, possible exception being Elena, but I think that he clearly thinks that he's superior to Mace Tyrell, and I mean, who would disagree with that? Stephanie Frederick saying, do you think the Tyrells are worried that Stannis may hold a grudge against them for the siege during Robert's Rebellion? So this is going back to Robert's Rebellion. The Tyrells were on the side of the Targaryens, but only sort of. So the Tyrells have got the largest, or the Reach has the largest army in all of Westeros. We don't often think of it like that, but they do. Their army is huge. Robert Baratheon, during the war, he got across to the Stormlands and sort of kind of worked his way across the south of Westeros before heading north up through the Riverlands to try and meet up with his allies. And partway through that, he met the Reach army, and basically they defeated him, or at least the Vanguard did. The Randall Tarley led Vanguard did this. They defeated the Baratheon army in probably the only real victory that the Targaryens had all the way through that war. But they didn't push on. They didn't. The Tyrells, almost Mace Tyrell, when he caught up with his Vanguard, when he caught up with Randall Tarley, he said, nope, let's just hang on for a moment. They allowed Robert Baratheon to escape, and then rather than chase him, They went down to Storm's End, which was, yes, this was the ancestral home of the Baratheons, and then they besieged it. But the siege that they did was a long one, and it didn't seem to be a particularly proactive one. Storm's End is interesting in that, yes, it's built up as this impenetrable castle, but you get Davos, who's somebody who understands the seas around that area. He managed to sail a boat in there. That was not a problem. Surely this massive fleet, the Redwyne fleet that were there besieging the castle, surely this huge army, the largest army in the Seven Kingdoms, could have figured out that there's lots of caves underneath this and tried to work, but they didn't. They just stayed there. They encircled it. They did not attack, but they also didn't allow anyone to escape. And Mace Tyrell, basically, the way that Elena says is that he just feasted away for a year. He didn't do huge amounts. Now, my interpretation of all of this is that Mace Tyrell was under orders from Elena, just stay out of this war. We're just going to wait, see who wins, and then we will pay fealty to them. So that seems to be what was going on. But the person who lost out of that strategy was undoubtedly Stannis. Stannis was the person who held Storm's End at the time, and they had a very bad time of it. So after a year or so of being besieged, no food was going in. They started, they ate the rats that were there. They were eating moldy food. Things were getting very bad. They went, if you just think about what do you eat after all the food is gone, things got that bad. So does Stannis hold a grudge against them? They only survived because Davos brought in onions and salt fish. Does Stannis hold a grudge against the Tyrells? I suspect not. I suspect that he just recognized that they were doing their duty. That is what Stannis understands, people doing their duty. He's not going to hold a grudge against them. So I don't think that the Tyrells are that worried that Stannis is holding a grudge. And also, I don't think that they're that worried because, Stannis is now all the way up to the north. I don't think he's going to come back down south anytime soon. Maura Lee, thank you so much. I answered a couple of your questions earlier. I hope you get a chance to see that. So Maura Lee saying, you're amazing, in a super sticker. Thank you so much. And also a super chat saying, thank you for all the fabulous content and stories. You're the best. Thank you, Maura. I do hugely appreciate that. Thank you. DM Collins saying Stannis is not a grudge holder, he's a rulebook observer. Yeah, absolutely. So that's basically where he's at. He's not the kind of person who's there holding grudges for many years for things that people did. If they were doing what they had to do, I think that he would understand that. Caroline Schween saying, hey Robert, nice haircut, thank you so much. What's the story with Loras? Is he still alive? Is the story told to Cersei a misdirection? Also Drew Atkins saying, do you believe that Loras is truly mortally wounded after his attack on Dragonstone? The circumstances seem suspect, and I wonder whether this could be part of a wider scheme for the Tyrells to reclaim their heir. And also I had that super chat a little bit earlier asking the same question. So for those who are show only people, Loras Tyrell is a slightly different figure in the books. He's still this amazing knight. He's made a member of the Kingsguard, but in the books there's this whole extra subplot to do with what's going on with Dragonstone, because Dragonstone was Stannis's, let's not forget. And it's also there in the bay just outside King's Landing. It is controlling access to King's Landing by water. So really, whoever's in charge of King's Landing needs to have control of Dragonstone. Now, Stannis held control of it. He went up north, and Cersei decided what she was going to do was get a fleet to besiege Dragonstone. Fine. The fleet, the Redwyne fleet, went off and did that, but they weren't really getting any results. They were just there encircling it, preventing any aid coming to Dragonstone. Then you get, this is all geopolitics, but then you get Euron as new king of the Iron Islands, started raiding across the west and south coast of Westeros, captured the Shield Islands and so on. And the force that was probably best placed to deal with this was the Redwyne fleet. And so the Redwyne fleet was besieging Dragonstone, and Loras goes, well, you know, why don't we send the Redwyne fleet down to take on Euron rather than have them just sort of sit there not doing much outside Dragonstone? And Cersei's going, well, you know, they're doing a job there. And so Loras says, okay, if I break this siege, if I go in there and I take Dragonstone, does that mean that the fleet can then go off and try and take out Euron? Because let's not forget, Euron is there threatening the Reach. He's just off the coast of the Reach. If he goes up the Honeywine River, which is there, he's already threatening to attack Old Town. He's got access to all of the Reach, and as we've already said, Highgarden is not exactly a very defendable castle. So Loras says, if I take Dragonstone, can the fleet go off elsewhere and try and sort out Euron? And it's like, okay, fine. So he heads off. He takes Dragonstone. Dragonstone is, again, another one of those castles where, yeah, it's a castle, but it's not the most defendable castle in the world. It's there, lots of gargoyle statues of dragons and all the rest of it. So he goes off, he attacks it. We don't see this, we just hear reports of it. He attacks it and does indeed claim it for the crown, and the fleet is freed up to go off and try and take Euron. We're going to see that sea battle, I'm sure, at some point early on in the Winds of Winter. But Loras is injured, we're told. He's very injured, and he can't now leave Dragonstone. He's just staying there trying to recover when he's in Dragonstone. So the question is this just a ruse? Is Loras actually okay? Is this some kind of cunning plan or plot on behalf of the Tyrells? Yes, it's suspect. The only person that we've got who says anything on this subject is Aurane Waters, who's effectively a Tyrell sympathizer, is a bastard born. But what would they gain by Loras secretly being alive when he's not really? Not much is the short answer. Okay, so let's assume that this theory is right. He's actually completely fine. What then? Well, not much really. The fleet has gone away. He's not got control of that. Yes, he's got control of Dragonstone, but Dragonstone aren't doing anything much. So is there an advantage to the Tyrells? Not hugely. I personally buy into this idea that probably he is injured. He's probably going to be there. He will probably claim it for the Tyrells at some point once Cersei, as she surely will, launches an attack on the Tyrells. And so my take is that why he is there is because at the end of the Winds of Winter, we are going to get this invasion from Daenerys, and she is going to come with her fleet and all the dragons and all the rest of it, and she's going to come to Westeros. And she can't just land in King's Landing because there's already somebody there who is Aegon the Sixth, who I think is going to take King's Landing. So she thinks, oh, well, I'll take Dragonstone instead. Whoever's defending Dragonstone, and I suspect it will be Loras, will not be able to defend it. But by that point, he is almost certainly going to be against the Lannisters, because Cersei has done something, maybe blowing up the Great Sept, killing Marjorie and all the rest of it. That may well be how it goes in the books. Don't know exactly. I've got a video about that coming out soon, incidentally. But he will probably be then looking for who does he side with against the Lannisters. And I think that Daenerys arriving will probably be a part of this. And so maybe he will form a part of Daenerys's Kingsguard. All of the prospective new kings of Westeros will be trying to form their Kingsguard, and having Loras Tyrell there will make sense for her to have him. Reflective Rambling saying, was talking about if the current monarchy falls or is reorganized, will the Kingsguard exist as is? Well, no, not necessarily. And so I think what we're going to see is the prospective monarchs of the Seven Kingdoms deciding on who will be in their old or who will be in their new Kingsguard. So that is what we're looking at here, is that people trying to establish a new Kingsguard. And I think the first person we're going to see doing a lot of this is probably going to be Aegon VI. He's already got one member of the Kingsguard, but the rest we've already had his advisors telling him he should be thinking carefully about this, not just people who are willing to fight for him and die for him, but political appointments. And so we would expect people like Darkstar to be getting involved there. So that's what's I suspect is going on with the Kingsguard, and we're going to get Daenerys also establishing her own Kingsguard. At the moment, she's basically just got Sir Barristan, although she's got her Blood Riders as well, who are sort of members of her Kingsguard. Angela Sanchez saying, I think this was your first question from Patreon, so welcome. Saying, in the books and show, the society of Westeros is obviously very patriarchal, with power generally clustered around men. There are exceptions, of course. House. Wondering what your take is on the fact that Elena seems to be the absolute matriarch of House Tyrell. In a way, Mace, the traditional heir, is not. Mace is portrayed as bumbling in both the book and the show. There are arguments to be made whether or not he is as incompetent as he seems. Yeah, I sometimes play with the idea that maybe he's putting on a bit. So I could see that being some rationale. But in the society of Westeros, capable of rule is rarely as important as being male. Yes, so George R. R. Martin is clearly working through this idea of the patriarchy and what this means. When we start the first book, all of the main houses in Westeros, the leader of them is male. As we move on, one after another, that starts to move. It certainly did on the show. It's definitely starting to happen in the books. It starts to move towards the time when the lead is actually a female. So House Targaryen moves to being Daenerys being the lead. House Tyrell, we see that actually Elena is technically leading. Mace Tyrell, we might think of as being technically the leader, but really it's Elena who's doing the leading. We look down to or in fact look up to House Stark. At the end of it all, Sansa was leading. This is George R. R. Martin showing a shift away from the patriarchal, not quite to the matriarchal, but showing us that actually women can rule just as well as men can. That doesn't mean women are better. Some of the female leaders are just trying to be what their fathers were. Cersei is the example of this. Cersei is a victim of the patriarchy just as much as anyone else is. She's always thinking of what her father would want or expect or think, and her thinking is very much in that vein. So George R. R. Martin has done this. Fire and Blood as a book is absolutely all about showing that whereas the line that we've been told, the line of rulers we've been told for the Targaryens in the first half of their rule is man after man after man after man, the reality is a lot more complicated. The reality is we have the queen who never was. We have the queen who sat on the throne for 6 months and ruled from Queen's Landing, but got rubbed out from history because her side lost. There are heirs who were never inherited because they're female. There are queens who ruled sitting on the Iron Throne, dispensing justice, but are never called equal to their husbands. That kind of thing George R. R. Martin has been very strong on all the way through. He doesn't come out and say it in a very, and this is what's going on, but he shows it. George R. R. Martin is a show not tell kind of author. So I would put Elena Tyrell as part of this bigger picture of him showing that whereas it has been and will be a patriarchal world, that does not necessarily mean that the men are ruling everything or should rule everything all the way through. So he's quite a subtle writer in this respect, in that he shows us these things rather than ever telling us this is the way of it. Bride of Fire saying, hi, Robert and Dan. Yeah, he's put himself to bed, but thank you. What do you think is up with Taena Merryweather? Double agent for the Tyrells, or actually trying to power grab through Cersei? Or do you think she has different motivations? Okay, so this is a book-only character. Taena Merryweather, she comes from Mere, so she's a Sozi. She is described as having dark hair, very attractive, very curvy, and very clearly trying to get into Cersei's good graces. Now, I've not studied her in as much depth as I know some other content creators have. So I would, as I always try and do, I will try and push you on to other content creators that I know have focused on these things. I know that Preston Jacobs, if you know his channel, he's done a few videos. I've not watched them. I will be honest, I've not watched them, but he's always thought-provoking. So if you're interested in slightly more in-depth stuff about what she might be up to, do go and have a look at his videos there. She wheedles her way into Cersei's good graces, eventually becoming her lover, and then she escapes, and Cersei remembers her as her only true friend. So, and when I say she escapes, when Cersei gets captured, she sort of leaves King's Landing. So there are indeed hints that maybe she is working for the Tyrells, but she doesn't have to be. She could just be somebody who's trying to create or trying to get power for her own sake. There are people in courtly life, this was what was happening all the time. If you just look at the court of Henry VIII or whatever, people would do this. People would come into court and would try and work their way up to a position of power and influence simply because that was what they own personally wanted. There are species with the Tyrells, maybe she's fusion. I don't think, as I say, I've not investigated it fully, but I don't think yet that there is enough evidence to say that this is a slam dunk. I don't think we can say definitely this is the case. I think it's just a hint that maybe that was going on. And it may well be that that's the last we see of her. It may well be that her part has been played and that she's now going to move away. Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Do you think there's any chance we'll see Elena Tyrell in one of the upcoming Duncan Egg stories? Also, would you please remind us of the role that Mace Tyrell played in Robert's Rebellion? I think I've covered that one off. And finally, how long will the Winds of Winter video be? I can't wait to see it yet. So that last thing, I'm doing a video for those who don't know on how long will the Winds of Winter be. It's taking a while. The irony is not lost on me that I am doing a video on the Winds of Winter and I keep on promising it and it's never coming. I've written it, I've recorded it, I'm editing it, and that's where it's at now. It will probably realistically be another week or maybe a bit more. I'm going to take off a few days. I'll say this at the end of the video, but I will take off a few days this next week. I try to a couple of times a year just to take a few days off just to recharge. Videos will keep coming. I've scheduled a couple of videos to go live, but I'm just going to take a little bit of time just to recenter myself, and I think it's good for all of us. 2020 has been quite the year, hasn't it? So I think it's good for all of us to take a little bit of time. But the other side of that's my top priority to get out. So expect it end of August, beginning of September is what I'm saying. Now, beyond that, you're asking about Elena Tyrell and whether she will appear in Dunk and Egg. Yes is the short answer. She should do. So Elena Tyrell clearly is very old. Dunk and Egg is clearly happening a long time ago, but some of the very old characters we have in A Song of Ice and Fire do appear as their younger selves in Dunk and Egg. We've already had Bloodraven. We will probably have Old Nan. Elena Tyrell, or Elena Redwyne, as she was then, was engaged to the youngest son of Aegon V, Egg. Now, that was a long and convoluted story, but basically Egg was trying to marry his children off to politically advantageous marriages, but it didn't quite go to plan. Elena's was basically he died, but the short answer is that actually he was gay, and so that was never going to work. So are we going to see her? Probably yes, when she was very young, but also probably not for a few stories yet. Egg is still a child in the Dunk and Egg stories. We've only had 3. George R. R. Martin has promised us a 4th after the Winds of Winter, but then for number 5 and beyond, we have to wait for The Other Side of a Dream of Spring. So, yeah, I think it'll be a while, if at all. We should do, though. The idea for Dunk and Egg is that the Dunk and Egg stories will carry on all the way through their lives, the lives of Dunk and Egg, leading all the way up to the deaths at the tragedy at Summerhall. So, yes, a big part of this is going to be Egg's plan to marry off his children to politically advantageous marriages, and that all starting to crumble. So we should do, but don't hold your breath. It's going to be quite a while. Chris of Oldstones, I just spotted saying, Danny Ferguson, Robert isn't always looking at the chat, so he might miss your questions. Yeah, I do. Unfortunately, I wish I could see everything that was going on in the chat. It moves very quickly. And if I'm talking, I'm not the greatest at multitasking, so I'm afraid it's not always possible for me to see all of the questions that's going on. Shannon T saying, how long has it been since we have seen Dan? A little bit. Yeah, he's got into the habit of taking himself up to bed now, so maybe not on a live stream, but I try to put pictures up on Instagram, Twitter, and the rest as and when I can. Click the chat just to list anything. Okay, I will take this time to just let people know a few things that are happening coming forward on the channel, as I said. So I'm going to take a few days off next week just to recharge my batteries. That I've got a couple of videos coming out during the week, so that's something to look forward to. But next Thursday there will not be a live stream. I'm just going to take the Thursday night off. So 2 weeks time will be the next live stream after this one, and it will be either House Velaryon or, and I might actually put this to my patrons, see what they want, either House Velaryon or the Wildlings, which was something that I have been meaning to cover for a while. So I will let my patrons decide which of those two things the next live stream is, which is going to be in 2 weeks time. As for The Well Told Tale, which is my second channel, I'm working my way through Deathworld by Harry Harrison. If you've never come across this, I don't think I spoke about this last week. If you've never come across this, this is one of those classics space opera stories, the kind of the stories when you think of science fiction and it's just ray guns and fun and just like exploring alien planets and mysteries and casino heists, all the good things. Then if you enjoy that kind of science fiction, I just picked out one of the stories of that genre that I love the most, which is Deathworld. Then please do go and check that out. It's my audio narration channel. In terms of this channel, what's coming up, the Lord of the Rings content is carrying on. If you're interested in Lord of the Rings, then please do check that out. The How Long is the Winds of Winter I've already spoken about, but I've also got a series of extra videos I'm looking at, thinking about the Winds of Winter. What are the big questions coming forward from the Winds of Winter? So I looked already about the Harpy. Who is the Harpy? And I've got a video coming up looking at whether Cersei will blow up the Great Sept in the books. She did on the show. It was fantastic on the show. I loved it. One of my favorite segments of the entire show was that slow build up and that music, amazing build up to the blowing up of the Great Sept. Will it happen in the books? I've taken a look at that, and if you're interested, I've got a video coming up. But I always, at this point, I thank my patrons. I frame these live streams around questions from my patrons because I cannot do what I do without my support, without support from my patrons. So thank you, patrons. If you would like to support this channel, if you would like to get access to some of the things I produce just for my patrons, like all of the audio I produce for this channel goes and is made available on Patreon at a $5 level. At a $10 level, you get a chance to vote to help me decide what I do. Next on this channel, as I say, I'll do a very quick poll to decide what the next live stream is about. So my $10 patrons will decide whether or not the next live stream is about the Wildlings or House Velaryon. And there are other benefits at other levels. So please do check that out. There's a link in the description. Questions from my patrons. Let's pick up. And I think I'm caught up on the chat. Question from Mara Lee saying, if House Tyrell calls the ships of the Redwyne fleet, it is said they can command an army that equals the royal fleet of King's Landing. How do you see the size of the fleet being put to best use in the last two books? Well, I don't know whether it's the best use, and actually I should probably just say, as people have said this in the chat, moderators, thank you. I have the best moderators in the world. I don't give them enough time and respect, but they do an amazing job. They deserve all of the accolades. So guys, you know who the patrons are. I'm going to see whether I can expand the patron team once I've had a chance to just take a breath. But I'm going to be prioritizing that. But please do thank the moderators in the chat. How do I see the Redwyne fleet being used in the last two books? So I don't think it's a matter of being how they're going to be best used. I don't think they're going to be used that well. they are going to attack Euron's fleet. Now, we hear reports of them. We don't see them. We don't have a point of view character in that fleet, but we hear reports of them coming around, and they seem to be being affected by the weather. Now, this is important. Euron does seem to have some kind of control over the weather, and he seems to be timing the battle that he clearly wants to be happening at the same time as the battle for Marine, for when he has sent Victarion over to Slaver's Bay to blow Dragonbinder. So, why? Well, I suspect he is trying to perform magic clearly in this battle. He is strapping magic users to the front of all of his ships, or some of his ships at least, so that they are going to be trying to perform magic, that they will die unless they perform some kind of magic. They're all going to be calling on their lords. They're all going to be calling on their gods. They're all going to be trying to perform some kind of magic to save themselves. We don't know what's going to happen, but Euron is not here trying to come up with some kind of huge cohesive plan. He is trying to create havoc. He is trying to destroy as much as he can and then rule over the ashes of it. He wants all of these magic users to be casting whatever magic spells they can, to be calling forth krakens, to be calling down lightning, to be doing everything. He wants a huge sea battle. He is even sacrificing his own unborn child in order to create as much magic as possible in the largest battle that he can, at the same time as is blown to try and win a dragon. This is going to be crazy what's going on there. So what's going on with the Redwyne fleet? They're going to be involved in a huge sea battle with the Iron Fleet, and they will probably come off worst. That this is not going to go well for them. I'm sorry, but this is one of those times where the bad guys are going to win. Things are going to get worse on the south coast than before they get better. It has to be said. Fred Versteeg saying, in the show, the Tarleys decided to choose against their liege lords. Do you think in the books they will do the same? Yeah, I think that's entirely possible that they will. Their liege lords, obviously being the Tyrells. The Tarleys will pick a side. Randall Tarley will decide who is it that he wants to throw his weight behind. He doesn't particularly respect his liege lords. He just wants to show his own ability. He is never, yes, he's the kind of the person who wins battles and all the rest of it. He's respected as a general, but he's never really been put in charge. He was undermined by Mace Tyrell during Robert's Rebellion, and he's been largely benched since. If he finds someone who will respect him and put him in charge, then yeah, I think he could well. I don't think he's going to be there on the side of House Tyrell, particularly once they've been I wouldn't say decimated, but badly damaged in King's Landing by whatever Cersei's about to do. Lost in the Fabric, thank you for the super chat, saying, no question, you're the best. Thank you. Don't forget to like the videos. Andrew K in the chat saying, Andrew K, one of my moderators, thank you, Andrew, saying, do you think the Reach's geography, typically being the last place visited with invasions/conflicts, adds to their neutrality and waiting to commit loyalty? Yeah, I think this is absolutely the case. So what we have typically in Westeros is that people are aiding from the east. When they invade from the east, the last place that they get to is the south, well, the north is probably the last place they get to, but in mainland Westeros, the southwest is the last place that they really get to. They, at the very least, get a chance to stop, take stock, figure out what's going on, and then decide which side they're going to go for. And that seems to be the character of a lot of the Reach, particularly House Hightower. They exemplify this. With the Targaryens, they could stop and think, and it was the same with the Starks. They could see what happened and go, you know what, we can't stop these dragons. We'll just allow the invasion to happen, and you know what, decide we're going to be on their side. So if they were on the East Coast, it would probably be slightly different. When you look at the people, so the Eyrie and the Vale of Arryn and all the rest of it, when the Andals arrived, there were a huge amount more battles than there were on the West Coast, because they didn't realize quite how big this invasion was going to be at the time. So yes, absolutely, I think that their geography has meant that they have had more time to consider things, and they haven't had to immediately face up to invasion straight away. Drew Atkins saying, hi Robert, hope you've been keeping well. Thank you, I have. As I say, I'm feeling 2020 has been taking its toll on me, as it has on all of us. So I've been needing a few days off, but I'm looking forward to being raring to go again in a week or so's time. I'm really enjoying this new series on the Great Houses of Westeros. I'm pleased. It's something I've been looking forward to doing. What I would like to know is whether you think Willas Tyrell will have any bearing on the story as we go forward. With most of the seen on page Tyrells potentially to die in winds. Lornduck20 also asked about this, saying, do you see House Tyrell possibly allying themselves with Dawn if Willas Tyrell eventually becomes the Lord of Highgarden? He bears no ill will towards Oberyn for his accident and seems to be a kind and gentle man who, like most people in Westeros, probably has no love for the Lannisters. Okay, so Willas Tyrell is a book only character, really. He stays at home in Highgarden. He is the heir to the Tyrells. Now, he's generally described as being clever. He's described as being thoughtful, the kind of person you think, okay, I can understand them being. The grandchild of Elena Tyrell, basically good. But whereas Marjorie and Loras head off to sort of engage in politics in the wider world and King's Landing, he stays behind, and he's there. Now he does. He has an injury from a fight with Oberyn Martell, but whereas that from many other people seems to have caused some kind of bad blood between the two families, the two of them actually seem to have got on quite well and understood that this is just one of those things that happened. So he is injured. I think he's got a gammy leg. It doesn't work very well. Might we see him allying himself with the Dawn? It's possible. So if you try and play your way through what's going to happen with House Tyrell, the way we left this was that Varys arranged the killing of Kevin Lannister, or he killed Kevin Lannister himself effectively, and is framing the Tyrells. This is almost certainly going to lead to Cersei killing the Tyrells in vengeance for her uncle's death. Now, whether that is exactly the same in the books as it was on the show, blowing up the Great Sept, I don't think that's really the main point. It's going to be big, it's going to be extravagant, it's going to be Cersei just meting out justice as she sees it, and Marjorie will almost certainly die. Whether Mace Tyrell does or not is up in the air. But the Tyrell army certainly quits King's Landing. We hear reports in one of the pre-release chapters from Winds of Winter that Mace's army is heading down the King's Road towards Storm's Landing. Now, if the Lannisters do effectively declare war on the Tyrells, as would be the case if Cersei blows up the Great Scepter or anything like that. Then the question is, what do the Tyrells do? They would naturally then go, okay, who can we ally ourselves with against the Lannisters? And the most logical person is, in the absence of Daenerys, who's still way off in Essos, the most logical person is Fagon, who has launched his invasion and has taken Storm's End and is about to take or attack King's Landing. So it is the logical thing for them to do, to be throwing their weight behind them. Dawn will almost certainly also throw their weight behind them. I'm not going to go into all the details there, but yes, what we're going to have is probably Aegon VI, who has got allies across the south of Westeros, in the Stormlands, because John Connington has returned, was one of the main lords in the Stormlands, then across to Dawn, and then across to the Reach. That seems to be the most likely thing that we're going to see. So Willas Tyrell's links across to Dawn will probably prove important in the longer term. This isn't one of those random things that are there in history. This is George R. R. Martin planning ahead, I suspect. Julia Erickson saying, hi Robert, how do you think that Elena's revenge on Cersei will play out in the books compared to on the show? So I think it will probably be relatively similar. I don't think it's going to be Jaime who attacks Highgarden, but I think that the Lannisters will take a Highgarden. I think that that's just going to be the next on their list, particularly if we have the Lannisters with Euron. They will probably be looking to take all of that kind of west and south part of Westeros. Will Elena get her revenge somehow? I think it's entirely possible that yes, she will admit. In dying, she will admit she is old and she's got nothing to lose now. She will admit that she was the one who killed Joffrey. So I think that, and wanting that to get back to Cersei, that makes absolute sense to me. So yes, I think it will be broadly the same. I don't think it's going to be Jaime who does this. I think Jaime's going to be caught up in the Riverlands for a long time. Maybe he will go back to Cersei briefly, but he's going to be heading up north after the Riverlands. So this is going to be Cersei and Euron doing this rather than Jaime with the Lannisters. Your last great night. Thank you so much for the super chat saying, do you think Garland is truly gallant or is just another player for Elena? He seems to be far too honourable and capable to be just a second son of Mace and not have Elena have some influence on him. Yeah, so I'm going to take a step back on this first before answering this specific bit of the question. So Mace Tyrell always comes across as a buffoon. He definitely did on the show. In the books, he does seem to be, but it seems quite hard to consider him as being such a buffoon in the books. Partly because he is the Lord, partly because he's Elena's son, but also Elena herself does, and it comes across so much more in the books when you read it, she deliberately tries to create this characterization of herself as being less capable as she is. She tries to give the impression of being less physically able than she is, perhaps less politically savvy than she is. She tries to give off this impression, and every implication is that Mace has learned that from her, and that the role of the Tyrells, as we've already said, the Tyrells are not the most powerful family in the Reach. They're not the most ancient, they're not the most rich, and yet they're in power. And the way they seem to remain in power is through political marriages, but also not seeming to be a threat. So if he can appear to be a complete buffoon, then people won't fear him, they won't respect him, but the Tyrells will remain in power. So that seems to be what's going on with him. The question is the extent to which he has personally gone down this route to try and create that idea that he is a buffoon and therefore not to be respected, and the extent to which he is simply doing Elena's bidding. So that is the question with him. I don't think he's quite as much of a buffoon as he is portrayed as being. I think that he plays it up quite a degree in the way that Elena plays it up, but yeah, he's clearly not the sharpest stick. In terms of Garland, is he quite as wonderful as he appears? I think that this is the same kind of idea. What we have here with the Tyrells is a family who realize their situation and are playing up to stereotypes. Even Loras, he realizes the role he has to play. The example we were talking about earlier with him, when he was like distributing flowers to maidens after winning jousts, he knows what he has to do. He knows the role he has to play as this kind of like great knight and all the rest of it. He does everything he has to do. Marjorie, she's playing the game. She's there with the small folk, caring about them, all the rest of it. It's Cersei sees through it. Yes, Marjorie might well be a good person, but Cersei realizes that she's playing a political game here. She's not just doing these things out of the goodness of her own heart. So whenever we think of the Tyrells, we shouldn't just think of them as being this family of noble lords. I think that they understand their role. I think that they understand that they have to play up to things. They have to be the characters that people need them to be. There's a huge amount of strong psychology that's going on there within the Tyrells, and clearly Elena has been leading in this for quite a long time. Shetland Apache saying, I don't see any of the male Tyrells doing anything that shows intelligence at all. I agree, but the question is whether or not that is deliberate on their part. It's possible that they are deliberately not showing any intelligence. Catherine Furseth, I think I've got 4 or 5 more questions now from my patrons saying, hi Robert, I'm confused as to what the driving force of House Tyrell is. Yes, they have fertile lands, are wealthy, etc. But what do they really want to use their power for? The greater good or ushering in a new enlightened era seem out? Is it just empty ambition? Or is there something more going on, like with the High Towers? I think, I mean, empty ambition is probably the wrong way of looking at it. I think that if you had to psychoanalyze the house, they do not feel that they are quite as established and worthy as the other great houses. Therefore, they have to create this pretense. They have to establish themselves over time. So that seems to be what their driving force is, not to grab more, but just to keep hold of where they are already. In Robert's Rebellion, they effectively kept out of the war as much as they could and tried to figure out where the power was going to be, and then they went to that side. That seems to be what they've been going on with the War of the Five Kings and the story that we've got. They were looking around. Well, first of all, they're supporting House Baratheon, then they go off and support the Renly, then they come back to the Lannisters. They're moving around all over the place. They're just trying to keep as much control and as much power as they possibly can. So that seems to be what it is. It's not actually people looking forward to try and build, to try and achieve something great. They're just trying to keep hold of what they already have. Mara Lee saying, if you could someday, well, moving on to questions, slightly more broader questions now, if you could someday retire to either Highgarden or in the city of Braavos, where would you retire to and why? Well, I think in terms of a retirement, it would have to be Highgarden. Braavos, I love the city. I find it fascinating. It's amazing. It's probably the most worked through city that George R. R. Martin has created. And if you go particularly just read the pre-release chapter from the Winds of Winter, the Mercy chapter, Arya's chapter there, when she's just moving through the city, it works so well, and it's clearly very based on Venice, which is my favorite city in this world. So yeah, I would very happily live there and explore it. But in terms of retiring, if you just want fun, if you just want beautiful things, if you just want nice spectacles, there's nowhere you can go in Westeros that is better than Highgarden, in my view. That's definitely is the best quality of life. Cyclops is better than Wolverine. Thank you for the super chat saying, could the High Towers or Redwynes overthrow the Tyrells? Yeah, they could. The High Towers in particular, but I don't think they want to or need to. They could have done it any time. That's not an issue. They were bigger, they were more powerful, they were stronger. They could probably at some points have challenged the Gardeners as well, but that's not what they're about. They're very happy where they are. The High Towers are very powerful already. They don't need to be one of these wardens of the north, the west, or the south, or anything like that. They're very happy where they are. About the Redwynes, they're more about the fleet than about anything else. So I don't think they would have particularly been in a position to overthrow them. But yeah, there's the point here is that there are several families that I would add the Tarleys to this as well, who could theoretically have challenged them, and the Tyrells have stayed there for 300 years. So they're doing that not through being the most powerful family, but through clever marriages. They married into the Redwynes, with Elena Redwyne becoming Elena Tyrell, and so on. So they are there by consensus rather than through particular enthusiasm on anyone's part. Denrus Alex saying, hey Robert, I hope you're doing well. I love the Queen of Thorns, Elena Tyrell, and how she steers the Tyrell conspiracy against the Lannisters behind the scenes. I especially love her for her sharp tongue and biting comebacks and comments. What is your favorite exchange or zinger from her? There are so many. She is a fantastic character, particularly one of the characters that, if anything, became greater in the show because it was such a fantastic portrayal by Diana Rigg. My favorite scene in the show was her one with Tywin Lannister, when the two of them are there and they're just trading barbs and they're sizing each other up, and there's a huge respect between the two of them, you can tell, but at the same time they're trying to jockey for position. So I think that as a set piece was probably what I liked the most. In terms of a single line, I loved it when she was there with Cersei and she was just saying, put the pen down there, we both know you're not writing anything. It was just perhaps she came out with better or pithier sayings, but it showed her understanding of Cersei and what she's about and what she's pretending to be. Cersei was trying to be her father, who was writing things, but Elena Tyrell knew that she wasn't her father. She understood her. She knew she was trying to be something that she wasn't. So that for me, that was probably the best. But as I say, overall, it was when she had these moments when she could play off other great actors with Jonathan Pryce as well, with the High Sparrow. There were fantastic scenes when they could just work off of each other. That was what worked the best for me. I've got one more question from my patrons coming out. Yeah, people talking about the Daenerys being Emma Peel in the Avengers. This was an ancient, for those who don't know, this was like a 60s UK TV series called The Avengers, not the superheroes, with and she was Emma Peel, a character in that, a fantastic character, and yeah, not the Avengers as in the Avengers that we know them. Art Jockey saying everything Preston Jacobs says will come true. I'm not entirely sure what that's in reference to, but yeah, so I will I'm definitely going to check out Preston Jacobs videos about Taena Merryweather, because it did sound like it was quite interesting. Shannon T, did Robert just call Diana ancient? No, I said that the TV show The Avengers is ancient, not her. She is a living legend. So yeah, the no, Diana Rigg is not ancient. Tinkerbell, this is my last question, I think, from my patrons. So now is a good time. If you've got any other questions for the chat, now is a good time to put it in. How now, Brown Cow, Carl Snark? Yes, absolutely. Tinkerbell says, this isn't about House Tyrell, but I have some additional comments about something that was said in your last live stream, the inspiration for Cersei, and I will happily read this. I had a read of this before we went on air, and I think this is really interesting. I think at least part of the inspiration for Cersei came from Catherine de' Medici. She was regent in France for two of her underage sons, who both died young. However, she had a third son who inherited the throne from his brother as a young adult, but was still very much under her influence. She was supposedly involved in a red wedding-like event when the entourage of the groom was slaughtered on her daughter's wedding night, though it's not sure if Catherine had anything to do with it or if her enemies just blamed her. During her regent years, there were two other reigning queens in Europe, a very male-dominated world. One was her daughter-in-law, like Sansa was almost Cersei's daughter-in-law, Mary, Queen of Scots, who after her husband's death went to reclaim the throne of her home Scotland, like Dany, but without dragons. The other was Queen Elizabeth I of England, who also has some Sansa vibes. And in the Game of Thrones TV show, there was a time when Cersei, Dany, and Sansa were the most powerful players, also in a male-dominated world. So that's the. I mean, I always love it when there are people in the chat or on Patreon who have more knowledge than me. That's Catherine de' Medici is a name I know, but not. I don't know all of the history going on there. So thank you so much for that. Reflective Rambling, thank you so much for the super chat, saying have a great break from us to you. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate that. I'm going to have a quick flick through the chat just to see if there are any more questions to quickly pick up on. Tinkerbell, oh hi there, Tinkerbell saying, I loved the Avengers and Emma Peel, and I think she would have become an Elena Tyrell-like character in old age. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's probably Sasak saying, I can watch and listen. Sorry, I will have to go back and count the glasses later. Well, sorry for that you missed counting the glasses on and off this time. Okay, guys, I'm going to call that one to an end now. Thank you so much. I've had some Fantastic questions this time around. As I say, there won't be a live stream this time next week, but in 2 weeks' time there will be, and my $10 plus patrons over on Patreon will get the chance to decide on what that one is. So thank you so much. I just had another super chat. Thank you. So Mr. E. Knight saying, who replaces the Tyrells as the seat of power in the Reach? I'm not seeing them sticking around beyond the Winds of Winter and the invasions by Aegon and or Dany. So I think that they will start with, and then we're going to get the invasions. Cersei and Euron will probably take them out of Highgarden, and then the question is what happens at the end of it all. I think it's probably going to, as with so many other places like Storm's End, it will remain one of those places that could be given to whoever ends up in charge at the end. So the Tyrells, not all of the Tyrells will be killed, but enough of them that House Tyrell, as we know it, is largely killed, and then it's a matter of whoever ends up as king at the end, probably will be King Bran, gets to decide who's going to be in charge of the Reach. So yes, I agree. They're not going to survive in my guessing anyway. Okay, so that's it for today. Thank you so much. If you are wanting more videos on or more live streams from me, there is going to be appearing a link somewhere around here. If you would like to support the channel, if you'd like to get access to some of the benefits that I do just for my patrons, there's going to be appearing a link somewhere around here. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again in 2 weeks' time.